Okay, so let's talk about something that could be a little confusing. Paying rent and how it affects your credit score. You'd think, hey, I pay my rent on time every month. Shouldn't that help my credit? But it's not always so simple. It's different from like credit card bills or loans. Rent payments don't automatically show up on your credit report with the big credit bureaus. And those credit bureaus are kind of like the record keepers for your credit history. Lenders check them when you want a mortgage or a car loan or even a new credit card. So even if you're the best tenant ever, always paying on time, your credit score might not show it, especially if your landlord isn't reporting those payments. But here's the interesting part. There's a way to get those rent payments noticed and make them work for you, and that's where these rent reporting services come in. Basically, they act like a go-between, connecting you to those credit bureaus. They take your steady rent payments and make sure they get seen, so to speak. Now, I know what you're thinking. Is there a catch? Well, first of all, not all of these services are free. Some might charge you a monthly fee or have a setup cost. Another thing is that they don't all report to all three of those big credit bureaus: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. You want to make sure the one you choose reports to all three if you really want to see a difference in your credit score. It's like getting a triple bonus. Oh, and here's a detail that's super important. Some services only report the good stuff when you pay on time, but some might report the late payments too. So if you're someone who sometimes runs a little behind, using one of these services might actually hurt your score instead of helping it. It all comes down to reading the fine print and picking a service that works with your payment habits. Now, let's imagine you're not using one of these rent reporting services, and things get a bit rough financially. You miss a couple of rent payments, and things happen. What happens then? Well, this is where it can get a little tricky because your landlord might decide to get a debt collection agency involved. And in the credit world, that's a major red flag. Having a debt collection on your credit report is like a big warning sign to lenders. It can really tank your credit score, sometimes making it drop by over 100 points. Yeah, not good. And here's the thing. Even if you eventually pay off that debt, that collection can stay on your report for 7 years. 7 years. It can make it much harder to get loans or credit cards with good terms. But hey, don't freak out. If you ever face a debt collection, remember that knowledge is power. You have rights under something called the Fair Credit Reporting Act. It protects you from things being reported unfairly or inaccurately, so you can challenge anything on your report that you think is wrong. You can also try talking to the debt collector and maybe even work out a deal. Sometimes he'll agree to remove the collection from your report if you pay off the debt. This whole thing about rent and credit really hit home for me a few years back. A good friend of mine, she was about to buy her first condo, super excited, good job, thought she had everything in order. And then, bam, her credit score wasn't what she expected. Turns out all those years of paying rent on time like clockwork, it didn't even show up on her credit history. Her landlord hadn't been reporting those payments. It was all that responsible renting. It was invisible. That was a real eye-opener for her, and honestly, for me too. It made me realize that you got to be proactive with this stuff. You can't just assume everything's fine. Got to understand how it all works. Luckily, she was able to fix it, build her credit up, and eventually got her mortgage. But it took time. It took effort. And it really shows you how those on-time rent payments, they can be so valuable for building a strong credit history. But sometimes you need a little help to make sure they actually count. And that's where those rent reporting services can come in. They give you a way to prove how reliable you are to lenders. Now, another thing I learned from my friend's experience is that talking to people can make a big difference. Like, when she was ready to apply for the mortgage again, she didn't just rely on her credit score. She went above and beyond, gave the lender a history of all her rent payments, even got a great recommendation from her landlord. Going that extra mile, it really made a difference. The lender could see the whole picture of how responsible she was with her finances, that she was a good borrower. And you know what? It worked. It shows that building a good relationship with your landlord, documenting your payments, it can really pay off down the line. Your credit score, it's important, no doubt, but it's not the only thing. It's just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to your finances. Focus on those good financial habits, budgeting, saving consistently, managing your debt. All of that will not only help you reach your goals, but also make you look even better to lenders down the road. So think about it this way. You're out there hunting for a new apartment, you find one that's perfect, and you're ready to apply. Well, why not ask the landlord if they happen to use a rent reporting service? It could be a win-win. You get to build your credit, and it shows them you're a responsible tenant. And hey, even if your landlord doesn't use one of these services, remember, those on-time payments you're making, they matter. You're building a track record, showing you could be trusted. That can make a real difference, not just for your next apartment, but for things like getting a loan down the road. The bottom line is when you understand how rent and credit work together, you're taking control. You're making smart choices for your future.